Alex Jones opens the discussion, highlighting the rapid deterioration in the relations involving Russia, Ukraine, NATO, and the United States. He emphasizes that while much attention is on Israel and Gaza, the ongoing conflict in Eastern Europe poses an existential threat that is underreported. NATO's aggressive posture, including a 250,000-strong conscription across Europe and the provision of increasingly powerful weaponry like Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, risks dragging the U.S. into direct warfare with Russia. Jones warns this escalating proxy war carries all the ingredients of a new world war, potentially a thermonuclear confrontation with irreversible consequences. Jones asserts that Russia's alliance with China and its military outperformance, including outproducing weapons and having greater troop numbers, skews the balance in this conflict. He suggests that NATO's insistence on continuing and intensifying the conflict is less about winning and more about deliberately destroying Europe and the broader West, driven by globalist and neoconservative agendas. Due to this dangerous trajectory, both he and guests like Elon Musk and Senator Mike Lee advocate for immediate U.S. withdrawal from NATO to prevent catastrophic escalation. Throughout the podcast, Jones frames the geopolitical and domestic crises as manifestations of a sinister globalist death cult aiming to reshape, control, and depopulate humanity. He explains the Great Reset agenda, backed by the UN and groups like the World Economic Forum, seeks to engineer a post-industrial society characterized by extreme resource restriction and engineered scarcity. This dystopian vision includes carbon taxes, carbon lockdowns, and technological surveillance, designed to enforce small city-states and rural agrarian zones with heavy top-down control. Jones highlights the deliberate destruction of global food production through policies like farming bans in various nations and the suppression of vital commodities. This engineered famine and economic downturn are part of a planned migration and depopulation strategy, accelerating the erosion of middle-class prosperity worldwide. The endgame, he warns, is a feudalistic society managed by a technocratic elite who control money, technology, and resources, while the vast majority are reduced to servitude. Religion, particularly Christianity, emerges as a core axis in Jones's analysis. He views the conflict as not only geopolitical, but spiritual, with the globalist movement specifically targeting Christian Western civilization for destruction. According to Jones, Christianity represents a historic, productive meritocratic culture, which the globalists fundamentally oppose. He cites examples of mass Christian exterminations worldwide, such as in Rwanda and Iraq, and connects these to an intentional campaign to destabilize Christian influence globally. Jones also delves into the spiritual battle underpinning current events, distinguishing between the forces of good, aligned with God and traditional Christianity, and the forces of evil, which he equates with globalist satanic influences. He urges a personal relationship with God as essential for understanding and resisting this spiritual war, cautioning that many religious institutions have been compromised and co-opted by dark influences. This spiritual dimension is as crucial as the material realities to overcoming the globalist death cult. One of the more alarming subjects Jones addresses is the Podesta Plan, a documented Democrat Party strategy for fomenting civil unrest and regional secessions in the event of a Trump re-election. According to Jones, this plan anticipates blue states and urban centers seceding from the U.S., which would escalate into full-scale civil war orchestrated by left-wing operatives, including Antifa and various ethnic militias. He notes this plan is not theoretical, but actively being tested and implemented, with staged false flags, radicalized groups, and controlled media narratives fueling escalating violence. Jones warns that leaders like Chuck Schumer openly call for forceful uprisings, and that provocations are being carefully manufactured to trigger this civil conflict. The military's loyalty and control are paramount, he emphasizes, as globalist-influenced senior officer ranks may side against constitutional loyalties. The podcast describes a dark scenario where violent mobs organized by left-wing agitators, funded and directed by Soros-linked NGOs and Democrat operatives, are poised to ignite a widespread race and class-based conflict with no easy resolution. Regarding the U.S. military, Jones voices deep concern about the ideological alignment of the officer corps with globalist and leftist doctrines. He describes top military leadership as often composed of sociology professors and beta males who have embraced leftist ideological training infused in war colleges and leadership programs. This has created a threat to the preservation of constitutional order in times of crisis, with loyalty to the Republic being undermined. Jones contrasts this with the enlisted ranks, praising them as generally patriotic and competent, but warns that a disconnect between rank-and-file troops and globalist generals poses a critical challenge. Female leadership in armed forces is questioned through a gendered lens, with Jones controversially asserting that female leaders are more prone to violence and bloodlust once in power, attributing this partly to men abdicating their traditional roles. The broader concern centers on ensuring the military remains a force loyal to the Constitution rather than ideological globalist control. Jones shares his personal ordeal with government persecution as a case study of the broader assault on free speech and alternative political expression in America. He chronicles multi-year legal battles, lawsuits, and orchestrated efforts by Democrat-linked law firms and federal agencies to silence him and entities like Mike Lindell's MyPillow. He paints a grim picture of weaponized judicial processes, including show trials and default judgments, designed to bankrupt dissidents and remove their platforms without fair trial. The podcast accuses the Department of Justice under both Obama and Biden of colluding with leftist operatives in using government resources to destroy critics of the establishment. Even when new DOJ officials appear to investigate these abuses, internal opposition, notably from Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, undermines reform efforts. Jones urges the public and political leaders to recognize and resist this final phase of judicial weaponization, which threatens the constitutional right to dissent. Jones candidly discusses race and identity politics, critiquing both leftist and right-wing tribalism. He argues that tribal instincts are universal among humans, but have been bred out of much of white Western culture, which he portrays as historically more meritocratic and less tribal. He asserts that the current left-wing strategy weaponizes race as a division tool to fracture society and prevent unified resistance to globalist agendas. He also highlights the problem of demonization and dehumanization, where individuals who assert traditional values, self-defense, or national identity are labeled as white supremacists or racists as a pretext for social and political marginalization. Jones warns this false labeling dismantles community morale and leaves groups vulnerable to persecution and destabilization. He emphasizes the need to reject identity-based factionalism in favor of unity focused on preserving civilization and the rule of law. The podcast approaches the COVID vaccine controversy with skepticism, reflecting widespread public distrust of pharmaceutical companies and government mandates. Jones discusses Trump's recent decision to take COVID and flu vaccines as confusing to his supporters, especially given widespread evidence and anecdotal accounts of serious adverse effects, including immune suppression and cancer risks linked to the vaccines. Jones also critiques the pharmaceutical industry's liability protections and government complicity, advocating for stripping vaccine makers of liability to enforce safety and accountability. The conversation highlights the manipulation of public health data and promotion of unproven vaccines despite questionable efficacy. This is positioned as part of the broader globalist agenda of control through health and science institutions. Jones and his interviewer delve into theological territory, analyzing the concept of the Antichrist and the ongoing spiritual warfare underpinning global events. Jones maintains that good and evil exist as equally real forces, and that the denial of good's existence is Satan's greatest trick. He stresses the importance of embracing a personal relationship with God to recognize truth and resist evil influences. The rise of transhumanism, AI, and occult practices among elites are framed as part of the Antichrist system, a satanic attempt to supplant God by creating a technocratic godhood and controlling humanity. Jones cautions that these forces seek to deceive billions into rejecting divine authority in favor of artificial, demonic control systems. The spiritual battle, he asserts, is inseparable from the political and cultural crises, and understanding this is vital to the destiny of civilization. Cultural manipulation via mainstream media Hollywood, and entertainment industries is another focal point. Jones condemns entertainment that normalizes violence, chaos, and ideological warfare, citing recent films glorifying rebel violence against law enforcement and promoting racial strife. He sees this as preparation for real-world chaos, conditioning populations to accept destructive rebellion as heroic. The media is portrayed as a tool used by globalist forces to propagate false narratives, suppress truthful reporting, and inflate culturally corrosive ideologies like radical LGBTQ agendas and historical revisionism. By undermining traditional values, the media serves a deliberate disinformation effort to demoralize societies and distract from the core issues of liberty, sovereignty, and spiritual identity. Jones outlines the accelerating collapse of the Western economic and demographic order as a consequence of globalist policy. He stresses that Europe's declining population and financial fragility are exploited to perpetuate endless war and economic stagnation. The US dollar's weakening and rise of alternative international financial coalitions like BRICS are evidence of a systemic shift. He argues that the globalist strategy involves sustained economic warfare, currency manipulation, and resource control aimed at bringing down established powers to usher in a totalitarian New World Order. This collapse is expected to be accompanied by social chaos, widespread poverty, and the destruction of the nation-state model as smaller city-states under technocratic control replace traditional governments. Despite the daunting outlook, Jones ends on a cautiously hopeful note, emphasizing individual responsibility and collective awakening as the antidote to globalist tyranny. He champions the ideals of classical liberalism rooted in the American founding principles of liberty, individual rights, and constitutional government. He stresses the importance of personal virtue, education, and spiritual commitment in fostering resilience. Jones calls on listeners to reject despair and hopelessness, urging them to engage actively in political and social spheres, support just leaders, and build strong communities grounded in faith and truth. He articulates a vision of a renewed civilization that honors meritocracy, family, and freedom, framing the current moment as a pivotal revolution for the soul of humanity.